hidden treasures of the 119th Psalm. Oh, we get to dig into some knowledge today in the fifth verse of the Nun section in the 119th Psalm. Actually, it's verse 109, and it's a bit perplexing, especially the way it reads in English, to me anyway. It says, verse 109 is, "My soul is continually in my hand, yet I do not forget thy law." So clearly, one of the questions I'm sure we all have is, what does it mean to have your soul continually in your hand? And obviously, he felt like he was under persecution, and what exactly is going on with that? And the beautiful thing is the nun, as we've talked about, is the word nephesh. And the nice thing about nephesh is it is definitely usually thought of as the soul, but is also, you know, when he breathed into Adam, he became a living being. And so this idea of having our life in our hands, it might be a better way to look at the verse from my perspective, especially since the way it was translated in 1 Samuel 19, when it says that King David came up against Goliath, he had his life in his hand. Yes, he did. In that sling needed to hit true, or otherwise, you know, that would be obviously the end of David's life. And so in so many different ways, you know, it's interesting that by faith, David steps forward to take on Goliath and had the faith in his own hand in order to obviously preserve his soul. But of course, we know that, you know, God is the one who's going to direct his hand so that he, you know, becomes the victor. But interestingly, if you look at the life of the psalmist, you know, he did live a life where quite often, you know, his life was in his hand, either at the end of a sword or the end of a sling. You know, his own son chased him, and you got all these things that happened in his life where you can see that he was faced with this kind of thing. But the point of the obviously none that he's telling us here, the knowledge he wants us to grasp hold of, is in spite of the fact that he's been through this constant struggle. It says, not unlike when you might remember the verse that we did in the hoof section, where it actually said, you know, I've become like a wineskin in the smoke, yet I did not forget thy statutes. Well, he's using that same idea of I did not forget. In other words, because of the conflict I'm entering into, it's causing me to not forget. In other words, the more intense the struggles that we have, the more the messages, you know, come home, the more the messages become unforgettable, as it would be, right? And I just look back in my own life, and I can think when I had the brain abscess, and I felt like my life was in my hand. Well, those passages, those Psalms that I studied, those places in my Bible that are in red, because I've told you this before, but I'll say it again, that when I was in the hospital at that time with a brain abscess and was probably the closest to death I've had through those illnesses that happened in that time in my life, I had a red pen that I was using to make my notes in my Bible at the time. And so that's the only time I've ever used that red pen. So when I look in those particular notes, when I see that red marking, I know what that is. I know when it was and what was going on at the time. And I can tell you that one of the places that I will never forget, right, is my wounds fester, is one line that's in the Psalms that I wrote all over in red because I was so experiencing what it was that the psalmist was experiencing. And here he is experiencing this constant place where his life is in his hand. But when it's in our hand, you know, when we're experiencing life and death kind of stuff, well, those words of the Lord that come through in this particular time will be knowledge, which it's interesting that the word knowledge in Hebrew, you know, as we've talked about these 7 anointings that Jesus gets in Isaiah 11, well, you know, the 5th is knowledge. And it's in Hebrew, it's a daled and it ends with a tav, and it's the idea of a servant that is going to be able to, and it's a dalid and an ayin and a tav, and the idea is that the servant will be able to see the truth. That's knowledge. Okay. And what did Jesus come, to bear witness to the truth, right? And so as we see the truth, that brings life. If we talk about how much our nefeshes, how much of our souls are connected to the idea of life, right? He breathed into and became a nefesh, became life. Well, life is connected in so many different ways to God. That idea of life has to do with the het, and that idea of being connected with God. And so this is why knowledge is important to our nefeshes, and specifically knowledge of the truth, which is Jesus. And again, as we look at this anointing, we get the idea of, oh my goodness, as these things get ingrained in us through our life lessons and through when our souls are continually in our hand, that's when things count. That's where our faith means the most. That's where the rubber meets the road. So thank you for listening today as we continue on the Nun section of the 119th Psalm.